Maybe we should do an episode on tomato hornworm. Somebody said that putting nets on the side of your high tunnel will prevent them, and I don't actually believe that. And I want to know if that's true or not.
This is Serious Grower Podcast. I'm Anna. I'm an entomologist. I'm a scientist. I am using this podcast to talk to all kinds of growers and eaters who are serious about their farms, their gardens, their local food systems. And I'm asking, how can science help? Today's co-host is Susan. She is a professor of agriculture at the University of New Hampshire. She runs a community garden. She works with students and community members across a really wide range. You'll hear plenty from her as she has a ton of experience, both as a commercial and non-commercial farmer. How are you doing? What's going on?
Oh, good. Just in winter hibernation, which is great.
I mean, obviously things slow down for you between the semesters. When does school start again?
The week of the 20th. So I still have some time to get some stuff done.
Yeah.
But not much is going on.
Do you have a good crew this semester?
I think I have 11 or 12 enrolled for the semester.
Awesome.
They're all new except for one. So I imagine it's going to be a good group.
Remind me again, because I really enjoy the social media stuff that you do. That's part of the class, right? People take turns being in charge of social media.
Yeah. And I definitely have classes, like my last class was not interested in social media at all. I've had other classes that have been more, because I was looking back, I'm like, oh, this group actually liked doing it and had fun. And this group, it was like pulling teeth. This semester I'm going to do it differently, but they have to take pictures and write captions and submit them to me.
I had this problem too, because I stupidly thought, oh, young people are really comfortable with social media, so they'll be all over it because they're young and I'm old, which I think it was more like they were really afraid to post something that was wrong. So I think your approach might work. They might be more likely to do it as long as there's an adult kind of screening the content.
I would love for people to make reels and stuff, but again, some kids are just really not interested in doing that. I'm not going to force you to put yourself online.
We'll talk more in future episodes about how differently Susan approaches her planting schedule to meet the needs of teaching a college course during the academic year and growing for a very unique client of the UNH dining hall system. But because she is growing off season, she's doing most of her growing in high tunnels. If you're not familiar with high tunnels, they might look a lot like a greenhouse to you, and I guarantee that you'll start seeing them everywhere now that you've heard me talking about them. That's kind of how the world works. They share a lot in common with greenhouses. They have a lot of similar gear for ventilation and things like that. But a greenhouse is a permanent structure with a floor, and it's almost always has some kind of lighting, while high tunnels are technically a temporary structure built over existing agricultural land, and you grow right in the ground versus growing in pots. Some folks do add heating systems to high tunnels, but they're usually not heated. An unheated high tunnel can produce some very delicious greens through the winter by trapping solar radiation inside a very simple tunnel on a sunny day in the dead of a New Hampshire winter. And then during the summer, they roll up the sides and they grow summer crops. High tunnel tomatoes tend to be much higher quality than tomatoes grown out in the open because they're protected from wind, they're protected from rain. Blocking all of that moisture can prevent fungal disease without the use of pesticide. It's a really cool system and it's really unique. So I asked Susan about pests that are unique to tunnel growing in her experience.
Maybe we should do an episode on tomato hornworm on this podcast.
Okay.
Somebody said that putting nets on the side of your high tunnel will prevent them, and I don't actually believe that. And I want to know if that's true or not.
Right. This is also a culture clash. When I first moved from Virginia to New Hampshire, I'm from New Hampshire, but I did all my education in Virginia. I'd been in California, I'd been in New York, but I really came up in Virginia. Then I came to New England. My first couple of meetings or workshops, people were cursing, dropping F-bombs. And I was like, whoa, things are different here. Of course, this is a New England culture. They're like F and Jeffin. And I was like, okay, we're in New Hampshire now. And another big culture shock for me. Hornworms were the #1 pest of tomatoes. And I was like, really? Like, I am used to tomatoes, which is out on like the eastern shore of Virginia. It's more of a truck crop. Like, it's more like the way that they do things in Florida. They'll do like the Florida basket weave. They harvest at breaker stage. You'll see like big swimming pool sized truckfuls of tomatoes driving around that are green. And then they ripen elsewhere. That's what I was used to. The key pest of that would be like corn earworm, tomato fruit worm, these migratory caterpillars. And hornworms, yeah, like you might see them, but like they're not as devastating versus like the vine ripened, usually indoors in high value real estate production that we see in tomato. It's kind of like a novelty.
I guess I would love to learn more, especially in a tunnel where you're not getting as deep of a freeze. Are my hornworms coming from overwintering, or are they coming from somewhere else and flying to my farm?
So I feel pretty confident that they're not coming from inside the tunnel.
I don't know.
I'm very confident of that, actually, because if they were coming from inside the tunnel, you would have way bigger of a problem. It's just one of these things where, like, one egg can do a real number on plants, especially if you're not paying attention. You know, actually, this might be an interesting project. I don't know if you've heard this, but like the caterpillars fluoresce under blacklight.
Yes.
Once purchased a flashlight, a blacklight flashlight that came with a really long set of tongs, like a comically large set of tongs. It was an IPM tool where you were supposed to shine the blacklight and then use the tongs to pull caterpillars off of your plant.
I could just imagine like crawling around at night with your long tongs and your flashlight.
Right? So what I need to look up is, what do we know about their flight patterns? When would you start going out and crawling around a tunnel at night if you were so brave that you would go out with your blacklight and your tongs? You don't really need tongs, but like it was like for people who didn't want to touch caterpillars.
I say, yeah, most of my students don't want to touch them, so maybe that would be helpful for them.
They're like pretty gross.
I know. But I'm also kind of like, if you're going to farm, you got to learn how to touch a caterpillar.
I also have always wanted to do something, because so much of what happens in the entomological world happens at night.
Yeah.
And maybe there is some opportunity for after dark entomology.
Start a YouTube page, After Dark Entomology.
Yeah.
After dark, does it just mean specifically after sunset, or is there like a time of night that certain insects are more active?
That's a really good question, and I don't know. For most insects, they are active at dusk, mostly because that's like a time where desiccation risk is the lowest. Right. So they're waiting for the sun to go down, so they're not at risk of drying out. A lot of the insects that we see that show what we call a crepuscular pattern, where they're active in the dawn and dusk periods of the day, they're also active when it's overcast.
Right.
They're just responding to that low light levels.
Is that how cutworms work, or are they really just at night?
Well, that's what I was going to say, is cutworms are a little bit different. I think they do have an internal clock.
Okay.
Where they are most active at a certain time of night. Actually, I had written this exact research question into my last Hatch proposal before I left UNH. That's why I'm kind of like, oops, I was going to try to answer that.
I mean, luckily, like, I had cutworms my first year farming in these tunnels. I don't have them anymore, mostly because I feel like we've gotten, well, I used that product, the Sluggo Plus that you recommended, and I feel like I haven't had an issue since that, which has been great.
This is going to sound so cuckoo, Susan, but I read something. The winter cutworm, the one that's specifically really cold hardy, the one that is active during the winter months when it's really cold, and like people will like send in pictures of this caterpillar like walking across snow and be like, holy this species, it's native to Europe, and you'll have like these huge outbreaks that we experienced a couple years ago here, there, and everywhere. Like, it was like, there's reports of this like being really, really bad. There was a report in the Midwest maybe a decade ago where like it was so bad that vets were getting calls because dogs were getting sick. They were eating, like, there were just so many. And then I guess it impacted the grass industry out in Oregon, and there were some people who were interested in studying it there. We're trying to get a rearing protocol up and going so we could do some serious research with this insect. It kind of just goes away. And apparently, even in its native range, it doesn't have outbreaks in the same way we do because it has more natural enemies in its native range, but you'll see peaks in activity every like 13 or 17 years. It's some weird number, and it'll last for like 2 or 3 years, and then they'll go away, and then like 17 years later it'll come back. I was reading a paper about this and I was like, this can't be right, because they were trying to like say like, why is it that this insect comes around every 17 years? And they were making the case that it had to do with solar radiation or solar flare. It was some like intergalactic kind of thing. And I was like, oh, this sounds like fill a ram's horn full of shit and plant it under a moon.
Oh my God. What is
biodynamic?
Biodynamic, yeah.
Yeah. So like at first I was like, this has to be some biodynamic stuff. And I was like, oh wait, no, like this is important. Everybody had these horrible problems. So we went out and educated people about what it was. And we said, you can do this. And then the next year people were like, oh, it went away. Thanks for the help.
Oh,
and I'm like, oh. But like that's what anybody would think, right?
I also stopped growing like brassicas in that bed that I had bad problems with. So I too. That's funny.
Going back to your question about hornworm, they definitely are coming in every year. In some instances, we can predict moth activity using lures. But when it comes to like one and done, like that's hard to combat.
Yeah. I mean, I've definitely killed a few of the moths in the past couple of years in the tunnel, which has felt very great.
But they're big, right? It's like getting a bird in there.
Yeah, they do look like a bird. I always tell my students that. I'm like, it looks like a bird. It really does. And I actually saved one so that I can show students like how big it is, because you might think it's something good because it's so big for some reason. I don't know. Those are horrible to kill. I do not like killing those. I'm not super squeamish, but that is one thing that gets there. They're like as big as like the mice that we get in our tunnels.
What do you guys do with mice? Because like I had a real change of heart when it came to this, when Evan told me, oh, the voles. So we were trapping for voles in the tunnel over there. And I was like, what do you do when you catch one? He goes, oh, I just put him out on the lawn. The birds come in, like the predators come and get him. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah. He's like, yeah, like I just put him out and they're gone the next day, like the raptors or whatever. That felt good and right to me. I don't know. How do you feel about it?
You mean after he killed it, he put it out on the lawn?
Well, we had like the traps, like you put peanut butter on them, like the physical traps.
Yeah, if I trap something like that, I will put it out for the raptors because we have a ton of them in the area and I want to keep them around. If I trap a rat, though, I will always put that in the dumpster because chances are it has poison in it because of protocols that we've been doing at the dairy for so many years.
I see. Okay, that makes sense. Like a vole would not be hanging out in the dairy.
Yeah, likely no, especially if I get it in a snap trap. Like, it's likely that it just met its maker that way. I try to be careful. There's also a cat on the property. Not that he's a barn cat, but he literally does no barn cat activities. He mostly just eats and gets fed. But, just in case one day he feels curious and wants to have a snack. Fortunately, I don't have a big issue with like mice or voles. I don't know why. I'm guessing because of the hay fields that they just stay in the hay fields and the raptors take care of that. My bigger issue is once I get a rat in my tunnel, it's war.
Yeah, that's interesting. Knowing the difference is kind of part of the learning opportunity too.
Yeah. I mean, the rats are at least the ones we have are just so much bigger that it's pretty obvious. And they are much smarter, so they're harder to catch.
Speaking of culture shocks, Andrew was telling me, maybe he told you this story before, but they had a class where they had a mouse run through and he was like, you could immediately tell who the farm kids were and who the not farm kids were. Because like there was just like boots, like bam, 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 like just like stomp, 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 and like all the rest of the kids were like, ah, like covering their eyes. He was like, as an educator in that moment, I was like, what do I do? Like, is this a good opportunity for a learning opportunity?
Yes, we encounter that a lot in the chicken class because the tunnel is only used for like 3 to 4 months a year. Whenever we reopen the tunnel and like start like really cleaning everything out and like moving stuff, almost always they find a nest. Yes, there's a group of students who are very concerned about the welfare of that mouse. And then there's another group of students who clearly worked in barns their whole life and are just like, you want me to take care of it? That was definitely something in like a learning curve in my career, I would say. I still remember the first time when I was working down in Massachusetts and we were harvesting carrots and I was across from my boss and he was like, don't move. And I was like, what? And then he just stomped a vole in front of me. I was like terrified. And then 2 years later, I'm like, then I'm the one who's like stomping the voles. But when you fair harvesting, every single carrot has a nibble out of the top.
That, I think a quick, like a swift death is probably the best. It's a lot better than other options. Because I would say, like, in the past, I always went for something that I didn't have to see, right? Yeah. Like the whole idea of the snap trap, I was like, ooh, I don't want to handle that. I'd rather use something else. I think those are the best ones, like the snap traps. You do have to deal with it. But if you have predators around or a dumpster, I guess that's the best way to go about it. But
yeah, I won't use sticky traps. That feels to me less human than the snap trap.
I am looking for some expertise on wildlife. They are kind of hard to find, especially when you're talking about managing them from a pest management point of view. I think you have a very unique situation where you are located, where you have some like urban pests and some rural pests all kind of living together. What would you want to know about the biology of any of these animals?
What would I want to know? I feel like I've done a lot of research because I've had to deal with them a lot. I feel like this is where farmers kind of sometimes outsmart professionals. Like they figure out, well, not outsmart, I wouldn't say that. They learn their habits like from a biological standpoint and then are creative in the way that they deal with it. Like, for example, like I learned via some farm on Instagram, and I could find her name and send it to you. Her name is Taylor. I can't remember the name of her farm in Vermont. They had posted a whole series on voles and mice and basically like, okay, you learn that they come out usually in the evenings and they like to go along the walls, which is like a very rodent thing to do. They like to feel protected. You don't want to move things around a lot. They get comfortable with a certain path. And then if you change something in their path, like they get scared. Whatever trapping method you do, you probably have to leave it out for a few days. I mean, you can check it every day. But they figured out like using gutters from just like from a house as pseudo tunnel along the side of a wall edge or a hoop, like the baseboards of a tunnel, and then putting traps on like one end that goes down the tunnel when it gets trapped at the other end with a snap trap.
Yeah.
And kind of like methods like that where like you're not going to buy that at a like Aubuchon or something at a hardware store, but like you can make that yourself.
That's such a good point though, that like somebody who's there and seeing the behavior and responding to the behavior they see with their own two eyes. I do want you to send me the name of that person. I want to reach out to them. Do you know what it reminds me of is ants. Like for years, entomologists who were like in my position, like just general IPM entomologists, people would be like, yeah, like I have ant problems in my transplants. Like if I'm transplanting something, the ants are damaging like broccoli transplants, especially in high tunnels. People were saying this a lot. And me and other entomologists were like, yeah, ants don't eat plants. Like you're just blaming the ants. Like they're in the wrong place, the wrong time, like collateral damage. Like it's something else. And you're seeing the ants and blaming the ants. It's you're stupid, I'm smart, right? Oops. Right? Come to find out, there are some behaviors, like a lot of ants do this thing where they will inject formic acid into plants. Like there's certain groups, especially in wooded areas, like highly forested areas, ants will create these mounds, like they call them solarium. They'll completely denude them of foliation. It's like a big mound of organic matter that heats up and stays warm, and they use that as a place to do their ant things. So what we've done is created this like unnaturally warm place. We've cleared the forest, we've put a tunnel there, and then they're like, oh, it's clear. Like, we don't have to do the work. And then we put a little tender transplant and they're like, I think not. And they come in and they inject it with their little poison and the plant gurgles.
Oh, wow.
I know. And I hadn't even heard of this kind of behavior before because I had never talked to ant people before. Ant people are really different from pest management people. Like these are different worlds. Because the ant people who really are into ant behavior, and it's fascinating,
right?
They're not into pest management. The people who do like ant control in buildings, they're a completely different group of people too. Like who would have thought that entomologists would be so siloed? But there's also a species of ant that's a big problem in wild blueberry called Allegheny mound ant. And so I had found this like little fact sheet that was written in Maine and reached out to Phil Fanning, who's the entomologist up there. And he's like, yeah, we have them all over the place. Oh, do you want me to run down to like the Home Depot and buy some vegetable transplants and throw them in these mounds and see if they come and kill them? So I think we're going to do that in the future. It's kind of like, are you familiar with Koch's postulates? If you think a pathogen causes a disease, you have to carry out Koch's postulates to confirm that you isolate the pathogen and you reinfect, and if you can recreate the symptoms. We're kind of going to do that with these mound ants and see can we recreate the symptoms that people keep on reporting to us, but we've been ignoring because we're like, yeah, ants don't do that. What are you talking about?
Right. Okay. That's pretty cool, actually. I mean, cool. I know, so. I kind of hope that you get some answers from it. I mean, are these farmers like treating for the ants?
No, I think they're just replanting. That's what sucks about it, though, is you think about like a cutworm, like not the winter cutworm we were talking about, but like your traditional cutworm. People would have a problem where they go in the springtime and they plant their tomato plants or whatever, and they come back the next day and half of their plants are like on the ground. I think that they'll just replant.
Right.
So as long as they catch that, like that happens overnight with cutworm, but with the ant thing, it's really hard. It's like you're losing so much time. If you're like, oh, after a couple of weeks, you're like, why are my transplants doing so badly? Could be these ants. I even asked the entomologist and they said it's not the ants. But yeah, I think they're just transplanting. We have a really hard time with this because, especially since we see it in tunnels, we have a couple different things that happen over and over and over again. Is the question of, can you use ant bait in agricultural settings? No, you cannot. Can you use ant bait in a structure? Yes, you can. Or is it organic? No. Right. So I have always told people, I can't tell you to use ant bait, but if you use ant bait, this is what you should do. I've done a little bit of homework and I was listening back to our conversation and I realized that I was trying to point out to you what a novelty it is that hornworms are an economic pest. And it's not because it's obscure. It's like actually absolutely the opposite. It's like a model organism. So it's one of the most highly studied organisms in the entomological world. That's why I was saying like, oh, it's funny to us that hornworm is like the top pest in tomato. In trying to answer some of the questions that we were talking about from the literature, you have to wade through so much information. What's their flight pattern? We were saying, when do they, well, you know, they fly at night. When during the night are they the most active? So like I go into my Google Scholar and I look at all the papers and it's all like the people who are studying the flight mechanics in order to inspire like the aeronautics industry. They like papers about like the musculature of this and da da da. And I'm just like, I just want to know when they're flying around, right?
Yes.
And then you go into the ecology world and they are studying the relationship between visual cues and olfactory cues, like smells, because they're using both. They're flying around at night. They're responding to floral odors. And I have some really cool pictures of like hawk moths flying in front of a datura flower with their little proboscis out. Another thing that is a really funny detail is that for me, I'm reading this list of papers and it's going back in history. I'm reading names of people I know and I'm like, oh, I didn't know they studied with that person. Like, oh, wow, they got their PhD in Arizona. Cool. And like you start reading about like your colleague who you didn't even know got their PhD in Arizona and imagining like, wow, they were like in the desert hanging out at night looking for hawk moths or their PhD. Like, that must have been so cool. So I got a little distracted is my point. But I have a lot of fun facts. How many fun facts do you want to know about hornworm?
How long will this episode be if you tell me all of your fun facts?
Maybe we can go through some of my fun facts and you can decide which ones are the best fun facts. We're talking about Manduca sexta or Manduca quinquemaculata. More than likely. There's other Manduca species, but these are the two primary ones, tobacco hornworm and tomato hornworm. Those names were given to them based on where they were first found, that you can find both of those species on tomato. What they have in common is that they are really good at detoxifying the chemical defense compounds in tomato. if you think about like nicotine, it's nicotine and all of its chemical cousins. They're super toxic. These caterpillars can eat tobacco leaves. They can eat tomato leaves. Like these are really gnarly compounds. All insects detoxify toxins using cytochrome P450s. So every insect has a suite of these. The P450s that hornworms have are really good at detoxifying this. But the fun fact, not only can they detoxify, like so they change these poisonous compounds in their tummies, they transport them out of their tummies into their hemolymph, which is like bug blood. And then they're re-toxified back into nicotine and they breathe them out of their spiracles. So like caterpillars have air holes on every segment of their body. They breathe them out again for their own chemical defense. They call it toxic halitosis.
Oh. It's like
the way that they proved that this scares off wolf spiders specifically is that when they raise caterpillars on host plant tissue that's low in these nicotine compounds, they're more likely to be eaten by wolf spiders.
What?
I know. Isn't that crazy?
Is there a way to like disrupt that?
No.
Wouldn't that be cool?
Not in a way that you could actually do. Well, yeah, of course it would be. There's actually easier ways to kill a caterpillar.
Right. No, I want it to be really complicated.
Right. So what that means is that like if you're growing a tomato that has less chemical defenses, that means it's also less defensive against other herbivores. So you might have more like flea beetles or something like that.
I guess this would be a question for somebody who does plant genetics with tomatoes is like, but are there detectable differences of those chemical compounds in tomato plants?
As luck would have it, I did get a chance to talk to a tomato breeder about tomato genetics and breeding for resistance. Dr. Vogel, I asked him to give me the view from 30,000 feet up about how crop breeders approach disease resistance.
My name is Greg Vogel. I'm an assistant professor of plant breeding and genetics at Cornell University, and I work on breeding and researching tomato and eggplant. So tomato, the scientific name is Solanum lycopersicum. The wild ancestor of tomato is native to South America, Western South America between the Andes Mountains and the coast. Various other species that are related to tomato still grow in the wild there. Plant breeders actually use genetic variation from those wild species to improve the crop that we now grow as tomato. In terms of disease resistance, for example, when plant breeders try to find gene for disease resistance, typically, in the case of tomato at least, that gene might not be present in tomato itself. When tomato was domesticated, there was like a genetic bottleneck. And only a small amount of the genetic variation in its wild ancestors ended up in that like domesticated crop that we grow and eat today. However, if you go to the wild relatives and inoculate those with the disease and look at those, oftentimes you'll find disease resistance in those wild relatives. And then plant breeders will cross the wild relative to tomato through just conventional crossing and selection, try to move that disease resistance into tomato. Nowadays, when you open up a seed catalog and look at a variety and it says it's resistant to diseases A through E, those are all genes that someone crossed from a wild relative of tomato at some point.
When you talk about that bottleneck that happened during domestication, about when did that happen and who was doing that? Where were they? Because I know I've heard some stories about people having to convince consumers that tomatoes were not poisonous. And that was part of domestication. What can you tell me about that?
So tomato was domesticated between both South America and Mesoamerica, what's now Mexico. The immediate wild ancestor of tomato produces fruit that are maybe like a pea in size. People in South America probably selected a form that maybe looked more like a cherry tomato, slightly larger than a pea. That moved to Mexico, Mesoamerica, and people there then selected the large fruited tomato that we're most familiar with today. That was probably around 7,000 years ago. The native people of Mexico grew and ate tomato and selected various types. You can look at like paintings and pictures that Europeans drew after the conquest of the Americas, and you can see that there are, smooth tomatoes, ribbed tomatoes, yellow tomatoes, red tomatoes. People were probably already growing a variety of different types back then. After the tomato was taken to Europe and became part of the cuisine of various different cultures in Europe, then it really radiated and people selected all sorts of different types. That anecdote that you mentioned, that at first people thought it was poisonous, there probably was some of that too, right? Because tomato is solanaceous plant. It's related to poisonous nightshades, just grown in like botanical gardens before eventually it made its way into the cuisine of these different local cultures there.
I have such a one-track mind. I'm always thinking about insects that have developed a tolerance to it. One of my podcast co-hosts was asking about hornworm. I was like, oh yeah, hornworm, like they're really good at detoxifying, for lack of a better term, nicotine compounds, like so much so that they can retoxify and then kind of fart out that gas as a chemical defense. That transfer into like bigger, sweeter fruit. It seems like the leaves kept their complements of those. I mean, is that true, or did the leaves also get a little bit friendlier, or did they keep their defense mechanisms over that history that you just told me?
That's an interesting question. Comparing tomato to its like immediate wild ancestor, which is called Solanum pimpinellifolium, and that's that species I mentioned that produces like pea-sized fruit. I don't know, to be honest, how different they are in terms of their like chemical defense mechanisms in the leaves, but there are other, more distantly related wild relatives of tomato that do have increased insect resistance. My predecessor in this position, Dr. Muchler, she spent a lot of her career actually breeding for insect resistance using a wild species called Solanum pinellii, which grows in the wild in Peru. And Solanum pinellii produces compounds that are called acyl sugars that are secreted by trichomes in the leaves. And these are like really sticky compounds that act as a deterrent. Insects really don't like them when they land on the leaves and are confronted with this chemical. So she actually was able, through a very, very complex crossing and selection procedure that took many, many years, to move that acyl sugar trait into domesticated tomato. Oftentimes, disease resistance in plants, especially like strong disease resistance, is very specific. That's the way the plant immune system works, right? There are individual genes in plants that produce individual proteins, and those proteins act as receptors that recognize very specific proteins produced by a very specific pathogen and then confer resistance to that one particular pathogen. In many cases, it's not even like all strains of that pathogen. It's only one strain of that pathogen. Those are situations in which you end up with like different races of a disease, right? You might see that in a seed catalog too, where it says this variety is resistant to Fusarium wilt races 1 and 2, but not race 3. That's because they have these different proteins that are only recognized by certain resistance genes that are present in certain plants. I don't really know that much about insect resistance. I am very familiar with the work that Martha did. And that's a trait that's much more genetically complex, right? It's controlled by many genes. And it is this more like broad spectrum resistance that is effective against many different species of insect. It would be much more challenging for the insect to like evolve resistance to this mechanism. But it makes the breeding much more complex because you have multiple genes you need to move in from the wild species. So, trade-offs, I guess.
So no luck when it comes to finding a tomato plant that's resistant to tomato hornworm, but maybe, we don't know if baby hornworms would get caught up in those glandular trichomes in the same way that other small insect pests did. That would have to be evaluated. But the acyl sugar lines that were developed by Martha Muchler are available for commercialization. So we could be seeing those insect-resistant varieties showing up in seed catalogs in the near future. In the meantime, we discussed good old-fashioned IPM practices, which starts with scouting and knowing when to scout by knowing the moth's life history. Last year, looking at base 10, Durham hit that area around July 17th through like the end of July. This would be the period where the moths are laying eggs. It takes time for them to emerge from their pupae in the spring, to fly around and be adults and grow eggs, meet somebody special, settle down and start a family, right? So that's how it takes about 600 to 700 growing degree days to do all of that. We would expect them to be laying eggs in July. And so they said about 40 degree days later, the really baby ones would be hatching out by the end of July. And then going forward, looking at the degree days from last year, you would start seeing the bigger ones like mid-August.
Gotcha.
Does that match up to what you might have seen last year? Do you remember?
Yeah, I'm wondering if I have a record of when I found them last year. I feel like we made a post about it.
That's another reason that social media really comes in handy for us.
We still had them in September, like real bad.
Oh, yeah. Like that's just like you'd expect them to start then. Those adults that start laying eggs in July, they will continue to lay eggs for the rest of the year. You would continue to see.
I do know that we had them really bad in September. And part of that was we had some bad trellising in one of the tunnels, and they kind of just like took off in that area because we weren't like effectively removing them. I mean, we didn't do any sprays or anything. We were just finding them and killing them. In one of the tunnels that worked really well because everything was trellised really nicely and like it worked. But
you could see them.
Yeah. The areas where there's too much leaf matter, it was like basically impossible. A good learning.
Did you see the poops before you saw the caterpillars?
Yeah. Yeah. Usually I'm pretty good. I will say I wasn't very good at trellising last year. And part of the reason that we do weekly pruning and trellising is to look for hornworms. Like that's part of the process. You see those pinholes or you see like just the edge eaten, and then I can usually find them when they're like really, really tiny. We just weren't as on top of it last summer for some reason. It just got away from us. But I find that some people are really good at finding them when they're little and some are not.
Well, hey, like if we ended up doing like an entomology after dark event, it would be in July or August. Like, what's going on the farm that time of year? Like, would there be people around who'd want to do that?
Yeah, the hope is that I will have some interested students working on the farm this summer. So, yeah.
Another thing I was thinking about is, have you met Istvan Miko? He's the entomological collection manager.
Does he teach it?
Like intro to entomology, I think.
Yeah. One of my students was in his class and she was doing collections in the tunnels because she needed to get like a lot of specimens for one semester. And he was interested too. He came out to the tunnels to put out some sticky cards or something to take some collections. But yeah.
Yeah, because if we wanted to do something like that, I would 100% involve him, because something that entomologists do for fun is something called blacklighting, where you go to a natural space, usually at the top of a hill, and you put up a sheet and you shine a black light on it. And it fools insects into thinking it's the moon. And you hang out next to that sheet and like you drink beers and stuff and you collect moths and bugs and stuff.
Sounds great.
And it's something we do for fun.
Super fun. Hey, you can't hate on biodynamics if that's what you're doing at night. So
yes, you're right to criticize me. That is my weak spot, because I had made fun of biodynamics for such a long time until somebody who studied moths was like, you do know that pest pressure is higher during full moons. And I'm like, oh, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
There's something there.
That would be interesting to do, though, because we could, like, obviously I'll have tomatoes in the tunnel this year. I don't do outdoor tomatoes anymore. I don't find it's worth my time. Yeah. But we have a community garden basically right next door. There'll be plenty of tomatoes and things in that garden. So we could kind of do a little bit of a comparison, or even go up to the garden at the daycare and see if they have anything.
So there might be, because there's the organic gardening club too. That's right down the road.
Yeah.
So they might be somebody who's hanging out during the summer.
Yeah. Usually I try to stay in communication with them, because I think my first year, or maybe it was my second year farming, they were like, oh, we have hornworms. And I was like, oh, that stinks. And then I'm like, all right, everybody checking every plant in our tunnel. And like, we were fine for a little while, but within like, I think probably a week, we probably found our first hornworm. They had it way worse than us. So I'm not sure why that was, but.
Well, you do have more protection on your tunnel. So like that leads to the next question that you had for me, was like, how are they getting in?
Yeah.
And they are really honed in on the odors associated with their host plants. They will follow the odors of it. And especially since they are night flying, they do use a little bit of visual cues, but they use that olfactory, like that odor thing. So they're obviously, no one has studied this with high tunnels. They've only studied it like in the high desert in Arizona kind of things, or in the lab. So they know there's a really strong response to these host odors, but like, it's not like they're studying like, how do they interact with the eaves of a high tunnel, right? Because you were asking me about the vents. And it sounds like if you want to completely exclude these insects, you have to think about all the openings, but at night.
I feel 50-50 about it, because I think there's definitely some airflow issues when I have excessive netting on the edges. And it's been really hot. Like, I think with climate change, like the number of days that the fan just runs like night and day in there versus like turning off at night, there's just way more of those kind of nights. And so I feel like also putting a netting on it there's not enough air exchange with the netting on, even with the sides rolled all the way up. Like they can only go up 4 feet or whatever. And then there's just not enough air moving through. I'm not sure. I haven't quite decided.
But it sounds like no matter what, you have less than if you didn't have that exclusion on the walls.
Yeah.
I think your point about the trade-offs is a really, really important one, especially in high tunnels, especially in summertime when you're thinking about heat management. Actually, New Hampshire's NRCS program, New Hampshire has been really leading the charge on this, been trying to take advantage of IPM programs. So NRCS does have, it's called the 595 practice, which is just to encourage farmers to do IPM, which what does that mean? Do IPM. So you have to have really specialized programs written by experts. Usually they'll go to the universities and be like, oh, this farmer wants to do X, Y, or Z. Can you write a program for this farmer? We think other farmers will want to adopt it. They have one now for netting on the sides of high tunnels. And part of the program, not only does it subsidize the netting, it subsidizes fans. So they have right up front said, hey, this is a possibility for you, but don't even think about it without thinking about airflow and adding circulation, which I think is very thoughtful of them.
Yeah. When I had talked to salesperson for Rimmel, when I was redoing the plastics and things like that, I was asking about netting and like what kind of netting we could install and how it could be more easily installed or taken down. Because I feel like a lot of the methods that are out there, it's like, it's a very permanent thing, and I have to take it down every year because of snow load. I can't keep a netting like that on the side. Like I would have issues. It's not super secure or easy to do, and I'm just like, there's got to be better ways than wiggle wiring it underneath the plastic, or I don't even really know. It's not a commonly used practice enough for there to be like a tried and true methods for that. The exclusion doesn't seem complete because I'm not like wiggle wiring it to like every centimeter of the tunnel on like the 90-foot wall and then down the edges and then along the bottom. Like that's just, it's not really super practical.
And it's very ironic because the way that you install the sidewalls compared to how people handle the doors.
Right.
So people will have like these like tight netting and the doors will be open.
Right. That's where I struggle. Like, and I not a good model of it either. It's like we should be, every time we go in and out the door, like we should be taking the netting off and then putting it back on. And it's like you go in and out those doors like 20 times a day. It's like it becomes just not.
Where I have seen this work is people who they'll build a vestibule. So you kind of have to airlock in and out. But one of the best designs I've seen, rather than having a door, you have 2 layers of screen that are both connected like 2x4s at the bottom. I'll send you a picture, but you can kind of worm your way through. So like they're overlapping each other, but you can still get in. You just slide that 2x4 over and then back in. It's really an elegant solution. Then again, like when you do that, it's like all or nothing. And then like whatever's inside there is trapped inside there. Like you're more likely to have greenhouse pests. It sounds like, if I was going to have a conclusion, is that moisture and heat in the summertime are far bigger concerns, especially for tomato, where you have this flowering crop. Excess heat can cause flower abortions. And it sounds like you have a practice. You're teaching your students how to do tomato training. You're adding in IPM scouting techniques on top of your cultural practices. I mean, that sounds pretty good. Would you want to change that at all, or are you happy with how that's going?
Yeah, I think that component of it works really well, and that I feel like not doing the netting for that purpose. Only qualm or my only issue is the birds. And I do have to take that seriously because of food safety risk. I do have to think about it this year. Last year, I just didn't do it. Like my netting was just like in shreds, and I was like, I'm just not doing it and seeing what happens.
All right, I'll leave it there. Thanks to Greg Vogel. Thanks to Susan. Find photos of what we discussed on our Instagram at Serious Grower Podcast is a production of New Hampshire community-supported research. If you're interested in becoming a co-host or would like to learn more about our mission to democratize agricultural research, visit our website at nhcsr.org. or come over to our YouTube channel at NHCSR, where we're sharing insights from the agricultural research community, and we'll be vlogging about our research efforts on the farm. You can support this work by liking and subscribing, and even better, consider joining our Patreon community.